Welcome to Fact Frenzy. Today, we're exploring an intense scenario. What if NATO and Russia went to war and nuclear weapons were used? In this hypothetical, NATO deploys troops to support Ukraine against increasing Russian aggression. As the conflict in Ukraine escalates, NATO's rapid response units, artillery, and air support are mobilized to stabilize the region. Russia sees NATO's actions as a direct threat to its security, initiating a decision-making crisis within Moscow. In a shocking response, Russia decides to launch a limited nuclear strike, targeting key decision-making centers in the United States. Russia's objective: to cripple NATO's strategic capabilities and force a halt to their support for Ukraine. Russian forces launch missiles aimed at military and government hubs in the United States. These missiles are armed with limited nuclear warheads, focusing on incapacitating U.S. decision-making capabilities rather than mass destruction. The U.S. defense network detects the missiles, and within moments, emergency responses are initiated. NATO allies are immediately informed, and the alliance enters DEFCON 1, the highest level of military readiness. Evacuation orders are issued, and emergency protocols unfold, aiming to safeguard civilian populations near potential impact zones. An emergency NATO summit is held to determine the course of action, with all allies preparing for a potential escalation. Allied leaders face a difficult choice: to retaliate with equal force, negotiate, or find an alternative to avoid further escalation. The U.S. military suggests a tactical strike on high-level Russian military assets as a show of force without mass casualties. Meanwhile, NATO leaders consider diplomatic outreach through neutral countries to mediate a rapid de-escalation. One option includes striking Russian command and control centers in response, while another option is a show of force at sea. In a highly calculated move, NATO opts to retaliate against Russian military infrastructure with a limited nuclear strike. Missiles are launched, aiming for Russian military installations far from civilian populations. The Kremlin now faces immense pressure. With decision-makers aware of the devastating consequences, there's an internal debate on escalation. While ground forces in Eastern Europe brace for combat, Moscow prepares for a possible NATO ground incursion. At this critical juncture, leaders from China, India, and the UN intervene, urging NATO and Russia to enter peace talks. With nuclear escalation looming, UN representatives offer mediation, focusing on a ceasefire and withdrawal from Ukraine. NATO leaders agree to a ceasefire to avoid further casualties, and Russia follows suit under pressure from its allies. Both sides stand down, maintaining readiness, but holding off on further strikes as talks proceed. A temporary ceasefire is established, with diplomatic representatives working around the clock to solidify a peace agreement. To secure the ceasefire, international peacekeepers are deployed in contested zones to prevent unintended skirmishes. Demilitarized zones are established along NATO and Russian lines, creating a buffer and de-escalation area. The conflict's brief duration still leads to massive economic disruptions, with trade and global markets severely impacted. Oil and gas prices skyrocket, and stock markets experience volatile fluctuations as uncertainty grips the world. Humanitarian groups pledge to support civilians displaced and affected by the brief but intense conflict. NATO leaders review their defense strategies, adapting to Russia's demonstrated willingness to escalate. The Russian government issues a statement framing their nuclear strike as a necessary defensive action to protect sovereignty. NATO officials assure citizens of bolstered defenses and reinforce deterrence in case of future threats. The UN calls for nuclear de-escalation talks, urging NATO, Russia, and other nuclear nations to reconsider their arsenals. So, what are the potential outcomes if this scenario were real? The most likely outcome after limited nuclear use would be long-term diplomatic negotiations, with neutral countries mediating. However, the damage to diplomatic relations would be severe, with NATO-Russia relations more strained than ever. Civilians in Europe and the US would bear the economic consequences, facing uncertainty and disrupted economies. Nuclear readiness would remain high, with both NATO and Russia reinforcing their defenses and nuclear policies. This scenario highlights the importance of nuclear restraint, as the potential for mutual destruction becomes clearer. In the wake of the conflict, global leaders would likely push for more extensive arms control treaties. The outcome? A changed world where nuclear escalation is avoided barely, leaving a lasting impact on global politics. New alliances might form, with neutral countries banding together to reduce reliance on nuclear powers. Economic recovery would take years, with industries adapting to a disrupted global energy supply. In the end, world leaders recognize the need for more effective peacekeeping measures. This close call would be a grim reminder of the dangers of escalation in modern warfare. The global population, having experienced fear and uncertainty, would demand peace and stability. This scenario underscores the importance of restraint and renewed efforts to reduce nuclear stockpiles. The conflict would leave scars, both physical and psychological, reminding us of the cost of conflict. Preventing future escalation would require not just military strength, but diplomacy, understanding, and caution. Our hope remains for a world where diplomatic solutions are always prioritized over war. Thank you for joining Fact Frenzy on this exploration of a world we hope never comes to pass. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more insights into global events.